Okay, so today we need to talk about finding your selling style. And in order to do that, we're going to use two instruments. One, the social styles assessment, and two, the psychographic assessment. It used to be, and one of the things that a lot of people believed is that salespeople were born and not made. There just seemed to be people who were gifted salespeople. One of my friends in high school, actually, was my brother's friend in high school. His brother was my best friend, and he was my brother's best friend. He's a little bit younger than I am. His name is Garrett Vance. His father owns John Vance Motors in Guthrie. And Garrett spent a lot of time. We went on a lot of trips with that family. And Garrett is one of these kids that he's always selling, or as I called it, conning. You know, I mean, he's just sort of naturally good at it. The textbook will tell you that anyone can be a salesperson. I'm not sure that's true. I'm not sure that I can take somebody who is agoraphobic, that's fear of, contact with the outside world, and, hold up in their apartment and make them a salesperson. Or if your passion is just to do double entry bookkeeping, I'm not sure that I can help you. Perhaps God can help you. I don't know how anybody stays awake long enough to get a degree in accounting, but I guess they do. I'm glad somebody does, because we need those numbers, but I couldn't do it. That just is what really, floats your boat. Preparing detailed financial analysis, I'm not sure this is going to be a great salesperson. But there's what I call the bubble. Those people that are neither, total introverts nor total extroverts, that you can help improve in their sales skills. One of the best salespeople I had, so the company I worked for was called the American Education Corporation. We were an educational software publisher. I think I've told you all this. What we did is we manufactured learning management systems for K-12. But unlike D2L, where I have to put the content in to it, we had everything already loaded, because teachers at the primary and secondary education level are not allowed to just go off and develop their own content. I've written a textbook. If I taught the course that corresponds to that textbook, I could use my own textbook. Teachers in K through 12 are not allowed to do that. Right? So we put all of the stuff in there. And one of the best salespeople I had was a woman who was soft-spoken. She was not terribly extroverted. A lot of the people that we had that were salespeople for our company, since we were an educational software publisher, were people who had been teachers, because they knew the industry and they were good at talking to other teachers and principals and stuff like that. And she was just like, she had been a teacher, and she was sort of like what you expect a teacher to be like. She was just kind of soft-spoken, and she could talk people, and she made them feel comfortable, but she was not what you would think of when you get the stereotypical picture of a salesperson in mind, right? And so this lecture about finding your style is to recognize that it's not all about high-pressure sales. In fact, we really try to avoid high-pressure sales tactics, and recognizing that in this era of value co-creation, that's not terribly effective. It may be good if you're focused on short-term results. If you're worried about the end of the quarter and you're just in a survival mode, maybe that'll help you survive. But in the long term, it can do real damage. And so finding your social style and recognizing that other people have different styles and how to match that is really, really important. How to communicate that is really, really important. And not everybody's going to be a high pressure salesman. In fact, we really don't want you to be. So social styles are not as in-depth as personality, which was first developed by psychologist Carl Jung. Now, I make merciless fun. Marketing as a discipline has its roots in two academic disciplines. It's a merger of two, and I make merciless fun of both of those disciplines. One is economics, and really largely agricultural economics, and two is psychology. And I think psychology is the closest thing to witchcraft we teach on a college campus, right? Lay on the couch and tell me about your feelings, and I'll fix you. So it's not as in-depth. Social styles are not as in-depth. We don't have the luxury of giving our clients the MMPI. It would be really nice if we could, but we don't have that luxury. So the MMPI is what they use to make diagnoses in the DSM-5. It stands for Minnesota Multi-Phase Personality Inventory. How many of you have taken it? It's a series of, I think it's about 400 questions. And it asks you, and some of the questions I've asked about are like insane. Like there's a question in there, or it used to be in there, I don't know if it still is, about, I've never had difficulty starting or holding my urine. I have no idea why that question is in there. But I have a friend who has a degree in witchcraft, psychiatry or psychology, and he insists that question, so it's a very in-depth instrument. Obviously, the instrument I gave you is not that in-depth. There are, there are 30 questions, basically, to assess where you are. So, and you can use these. You can look at, as you get better at this, you'll be able to tell what your prospect's social style is. Now, once you've ascertained what their social style is, then you need to know what motivates them, which is the psychographic profile that I had you take, which is the vows. That's psychographic stuff. And that's going to tell you what motivates them, not how to talk to them. Social styles is going to tell you how to communicate better with your prospect if you can figure out what their social style is. Vows will tell you what to say once you figure out, and not how to say it, but what's going to motivate them. And although business-to-business sales should be more rational because the demand is derived, it's not, I want this for myself, I'm using this for to satisfy customers or organizational needs and goals, it's still, to a certain extent, it's about liking the person that you're dealing with, right? And understanding that. So we're going to talk about how to deal with these different types of people, how you should respond to them, and then what is it that's going to motivate them. So if you're talking in the language that they talk about, but you're not talking about what motivates them, you're wasting your time. If you're talking about what motivates them, but you're not making a connection, you're wasting your time. So we want to integrate the two and find ways that we can reach our customer and motivate them and talk to them in the way that's most effective. So the social styles is a 2x2 matrix. On the vertical axis, you have the degree of responsiveness. So are you and on the vertical axis, the horizontal axis, you have the degree of assertiveness. Are you task-oriented or are you people-oriented? And are you more likely to ask or are you more likely to tell? Now, it's a continuum, right? And so you found the score, and you all should have added it up, figured out, and come up with what you are, right, on this. So it's a continuum. So some people are, highly one or the other, and other people may be closer to another. And lots of people will have a secondary social style that they will fall back. If you had to guess, what kind of social style do you think I am? I can tell you I'm very highly one.
Analytical, the first one.
Oh. I'm a driver.
I got that.
I like to tell people what to do. I like authority, and I want facts. and that's just who I am. My secondary would probably be analytical, because I do like to think about things, but mostly I like to boss people around, and, and I'm not terribly interested in sort of maybe the human aspects of things, so I'm a driver. So analyticals, they're low on responsiveness and low on assertiveness. These are people who are very serious. They like to think things over. They're persistent and they ask a lot of questions. Now it's important, the social styles will be on the second exam, but we'll also, when we get to prospecting, we'll do an exercise where we talk about how you identify these people and what's going to motivate them. So it's important that as you think about these, and when we talk about objections, we're going to talk about different methods of dealing with objections. And you're going to have to remember these, so it's not like you can information dump it and this won't matter after the second exam, because this is cumulative. Although we talk about these chapters as though they're distinct, the sales process is a holistic approach, right? It's not like you can say, I'm going to do my pre-approach now, and then I'm going to approach the prospect. I did see one student at a competition this last year in Florida, and she came right out and said it. It's on the rubric, and she's like, I am trying to build rapport with you. It was the funniest thing. And I'm like, oh God, tell her off the rubric. Obviously the buyer was not having any, she's like, I am trying to build rapport with you. So that's not the way this works. But you can't just sort of dump this. So analyticals, when you're dealing with them, so when you think about objections and things, which we'll talk about a lot in depth, or when you're dealing with the presentation, what are analyticals going to want from you, do you think?
Information.
They're going to want numbers. They're going to want information. They're going to be very interested in the facts. There's an old television show called Dragnet. They made a spoof on it with Dan Aykroyd years later. And in it, I think it's Sergeant Friday. I think the character who's, just the facts, man. Just the facts. That's the analytical. They're not going to be overly assertive, unlike a driver, but they want the facts. They want presentation of the facts. Analyticals can suffer from what we call analysis paralysis. Amiables, in terms of selling, these are the ones that are generally the easiest to sell to, because they are, as the title implies, what? Amiable. They're high in responsiveness and low in assertiveness. They tend to be loyal. These are the ones that if you can get, they have a good customer lifetime value. Good CLV, because they're loyal. They tend to like brands, brand loyal. They're personable and patient, but they're uncomfortable with risk. Now, the one caveat to you want amiables to sell to is that a lot of times amiables may not buy as quickly as you want them to, and we had this discussion again. Well, I think one of you asked me about this in here, because they like the relationship. They're afraid that if they commit, that maybe the relationship will end, right? But generally speaking, amiables, are maybe the easiest to sell to, because they like to talk, they're patient, and they're horribly polite. They don't want to say no. Driver, low in responsiveness, high on assertiveness, very task-oriented. They are highly committed, and drivers are risk takers. They do like clearly defined goals. So when you're dealing with a driver, if you set an agenda, if you say, I prepared an agenda for this meeting today, for our sales call, they like that. When I was first employed here at the university, I wasn't the legal counsel, I wasn't the associate general counsel to start out with. I didn't have my law degree at the time I was going through law school. And I was the assistant equity officer and then the equity officer. What that meant was I was the fair guy. Equity, not as in like equity that you have in your house. That's a different type of equity. And when I would tell people that I was the equity officer, they would think that meant that I had something to do with finance, and that's not what it was. I did all of the social justice programs. So I did all of the grievances. And one of the first ones I had was between an administrator or a dean in the College of Liberal Arts and one of his tenured but still more junior faculty members. So there's the way it works in higher education is if you are a full-time person but you don't have a terminal degree, you have the rank of instructor, or some universities call that lecturer. We call lecturers adjuncts. Those are not full-time faculty members. But you start out, if you don't have a terminal degree, with the title of instructor here, lecturer at some places. And then when you get the terminal degree, you generally are then elevated to the rank of assistant professor, and you're not tenured. After 5 years here, you go up for both tenure and promotion, and it's a bifurcated process. So you may or may not get one or the other. It's unusual, but we have had people that got tenure and didn't get promoted, which is, I mean, it's an interesting dynamic because we're saying, wow, you're really, you're kind of crappy, but we're going to give you a job for life, right? I mean, you sort of suck, but we're going to keep you around for the rest of, as long as you want to stay. Once you have tenure, it's a little dicey about trying to get rid of it. It's not that you can't get rid of a tenured faculty member, but when I was associate general counsel, we had a tenured faculty member, full tenured faculty member who stabbed a student with a pencil, and I couldn't fire him. I mean, I tried, but couldn't fire him. So, you generally get associate and tenure together. And then you have one more promotion, which is promotion to full professor. And that's, at most institutions, that's hard to get. Lots of people get tenure, they get promoted to associate, and they never make full professor. Because you're supposed to be, at that point, exceptional. As a scholar, as a teacher, and in service, you should be an exceptional person. So lots of people don't progress past the associate professor rank. So this was an associate professor. She was tenured, and I can tell you these stories because I'm not giving you names of the people involved, but it occurred to me that the problem was that they had a lack of communication. She came from New York, and she was a driver, and she would go in to his office and say, I need da 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 da, and he would be like, no, you don't. like, who do you think you are to come barging? And it's just, in New York, where she came from, she said, and I was talking to him, he wasn't amiable. He had spent his entire life. I really consider Oklahoma, I mean, lots of geographers don't consider Oklahoma to be Southern. They'll say we're Southwestern or Midwest. I do not think we are Midwestern, by the way, in any way, shape, or form. Culturally, we're pretty Southern. I mean, we like chicken fried steak and mashed potatoes and fried okra, and I mean, we're pretty Southern, and I say that as somebody who loves that culture. And he had spent his entire, he graduated with his PhD, I believe, from the University of Mississippi. And he was just sort of a social guy. He didn't walk into his, I mean, he was a, how are you, kind of he was a gregarious person, and she just totally rubbed him the wrong way. It was a failure to communicate because she'd walk in and she thought, I don't want to waste his time. I just want to tell him what I need and get out. And that's not the way he wanted to do things, right? And so she was a driver, and he was pretty much an amiable until he got his back up against the wall, and then he became something different. But it occurred to me that they were not communicating, and it was like, why don't you try? And I had to convince her that like in this power dynamic, you don't have the power. He does, right? And if you want these things, you're going to have to learn to communicate more effectively with him. I appreciate it because I tend to be a driver. I tend to, like, don't waste my time. Tell me what you want. Get to the point. When I go to Sam's Club and they have the people, Sam's Club has these people that come in to sell stuff like DirecTV and things like that, and they always start out with, well, how are you today? Are you feeling? What do you want? Right? I mean, that just, what do you want? And that's what she was. Expressives, high responsive, high assertive. Expressives are your theater majors, right? I remember being on this tour. I took a student tour in my senior year in college and my brother's senior year in high school. And my mother paid for us all to go, and we went with my best friend and my brother and my mom. We were on the student tour. And the woman who put our group together was a teacher from Guthrie High School. And she was sort of our little leader, but she was not the tour leader. They hire a professional tour guide to go through all these things. And Marg was her name. My teacher's name was Marg. And she and the tour guide did not hit it off. And the tour guide kept calling her Margot, which Marg hated being called Margot because it was Marg, not Margot. And I remember the tour guide screaming at her, my mother was on the stages of Europe for 50 years and is not as theatrical as you, Margot. Right? And that she was. She's just very theatrical. She's, likes to be the center of attention. She wanted to talk. She was loud, and that made she'd done this tour a lot. She took a lot of students, and so she thought she knew as much as the tour guide did, and she would start, like telling tall tales or whatever, and that really annoyed the tour drivers. So they like to be the center of attention. They can be enormously emotional, and they can be drama queens. And Margot, as the tour guide, was tended to be, if you heard her feelings, she tended to be highly dramatic about it. And so they like to be the center of attention. If you're selling to people like this, what do you want to be?
Not the center of attention.
Yeah, you want to play on there. I mean, one of the things that's fascinating to me in the countries that are successful, and I'm not making a judgment here, but the countries that are successful in negotiating with Donald Trump flatter him. He loves these rallies. He likes this. He likes to be the center of it. He likes to get the crowd riled up. And the countries that have been successful in negotiating with him, Saudi Arabia, for example, they put on a big party and they flatter him. Now, we can talk about whether or not that's ethical, right? But I mean, you can get, with an expressive, you can get a long way. Flattery will get you a lot with them. So now we're going to combine these, and there's not a one-to-one, so we're going to make arguments about this. So let's go back through this. Let me go, let's just see. Who are my analyticals in here? Got 2 analytical, 3, 4. Who are the amiables? We only have 2. That's unusual. Usually Oklahomans, there are a lot of amiables, usually. Who are the drivers? 1, 2, 3, 4, all right. And who are the expressives?
Oh.
Wow, we have quite a few expressives in here. All right, so we now know how to talk to you all. What motivates you? So Val says on their website, good marketing is about good insights. And this is psychographics. What is it that motivates people? So Val's is, escape from this for 1 minute. Val's is also a matrix. And what it looks at is, and there are 2 that fall outside of the matrix, whether or not you have access to resources, and then what motivates you within those access to resources. Are you motivated by ideas? Or are you motivated by achievement? Do you want to be praised? Do you seek out, are you one of these people that likes to have the trophy? Or are you motivated by self-expression? So what's self-expression? These are the what? The artists, right? And then whether or not you have high access to resources or low access to resources. Now, the reason that there are 2 that fall sort of outside, and they put the survivors, you can see them between believers and strivers, right? They have low access to resources, this group, but they can sort of go either way between belief and strivers. Mostly, I think survivors are more believers, but they have the lowest access to resources. The reason that they put innovators sort of in the middle is that innovators they have high access to resources, and they tend to be motivated by all 3 of those things. They like to think, they're willing to try new things, but they also like to be recognized, and they also engage in a lot of things that allow for self-expression. So these are the people that'll, on a trip, they're experiencing everything. They'll go and do karaoke, and they have a lot of different activities. And so, what are you motivated by? And then how much access to resources? Now, one thing that happens with particularly students is that a lot of you can move, right? You might have low access to resources now as you're students, but as you become salespeople, professional salespeople, that'll change. And you'll have more access to resources. Again, sales is the only one that really allows you to set your own salary. Right? You can decide how much you want to make and set your own salary and goals. So innovators are always taking in information. They like to experiment. They have the highest number of financial transactions. So what does this mean? One of the things that Donald Trump points to and says is like, the economy's great, the stock market is going great guns, which by the way, it may tank. And that's not going to be good for his reelection if it does. Because it will, why is it that he points to the stock market? Well, it's one of the things that you can point to as an objective reality. You can say, the S&P 500 is up, 30 points or whatever, highest numbers ever. But the vast majority of us, if we own stocks, we have no idea what we own because it's in a what? Huh?
A mutual fund.
Yeah, it's in our retirement. If you're a public sector employee like I am, it's called a 403B, which is the part of the tax code which allows for you to save money pre-tax and then pay the taxes when you retire. Now they've come up with a different vehicle that allows you to actually pay the taxes in advance, and then when you retire, it's tax-free. What's the advantages and disadvantages of both? The idea of the 403B or 401k, which is what they have in the private sector, is that you'll save more because it's costing you less at this point, but then you're gonna have to pay taxes when you retire. If you can pay the taxes now, pre-tax, if you can pay taxes now on it, the advantage is that what? If it grows really a lot, you may have a lot of income that's not taxable when you retire. So it's, what, can you save a lot now? A lot of people, particularly when they start out in their career, the idea of the 403B or 401K is that it's less painful for you if you're saving that pre-tax, because it lowers your tax burden, right? Which means you're not paying taxes on those dollars. So these are the people who actually are most likely to actively engage, to have their own account and actively manage that kind of account, their investments. What's the advantage of having a 403B or a 401K and you putting it in? You're not actively managing that money, right? You sort of tell them what you want, and I guess you could actively choose stocks, but usually what they do is it's pretty formulaic. They decide whether or not you're real risk adverse or if you like risk and when you're going to retire, and then they just sort of make investments based on that kind of information, and you don't actively engage in it. So a lot of people don't have a 401K or 403B or the other vehicle that allows you to put it in post-tax, and I can't remember which part of the code that is. A lot of people don't have stocks. So when Donald Trump starts saying the stock market's at all-time highs, the vast majority of Americans, that has nothing to do with their wealth, right? But for innovators, it may. Right? They're willing to engage in these high number of financial transactions, and they're receptive to new ideas. So I like to think about these things. How do we make this concrete? Let's think about restaurants. There are all kinds of restaurants in Oklahoma City. One of the things that I talked to my friends when I got my PhD, and I told them that I was coming back to Oklahoma, my dissertation committee was very, very, very distraught with that because they wanted me to go to what's called an R1 school, and they thought I was going to be their star. I'm like, look, I have a vested teacher's retirement in Oklahoma. I got to go back to Oklahoma, and they were highly, highly offended by that, and they also just didn't understand it. Why the hell would anyone want to go to Oklahoma? And so I actually invited my dissertation chair out to Oklahoma. He came for 2 summers in a row and spent 2 or 3 weeks each time with me and my family. And he's like, I can see why you like this place. It's, I mean, in terms of food, you can get any kind of food that you like. I mean, we have, if you like sushi, we have world-class sushi here in Oklahoma. I would not have thought about that when I was a kid growing up, that we would have this when I was growing up here. Because Oklahomans eat raw fish. That's, of course that's misnomer, not all sushi is raw. But, and it's popular. And we have a lot of it. Go down Western Avenue. We have, Sushi Nico, and there's, the one that's up further north on Western, and there's 2 or 3 in Bricktown. I mean, we have good food. Yeah, I mean, we have good food in Oklahoma. Anything you can get in New York, you can get. If you want, this whole new thing, what is the whole new movement? Well, it's locally sourced food. Go to Automobile Alley or to Midtown, and you can find all kinds of restaurants that are local. Cultivar in Automobile Alley. How many of you eat in a cultivar? Right? It's locally sourced, and it's Hispanic or Mexican food, but it's all. I mean, this is pretty innovative, right? So where do you think innovators would be attracted to in Oklahoma City in terms of our restaurant choices? What would you think?
Mexican food? Is that what you're talking about?
No, an actual
Location-wise?
specific restaurant. Give me a specific restaurant.
Ted's.
You think they'd be attracted to Ted's?
In North OKC, yeah.
Okay,
It's a pretty
no.
good place, I'm just saying.
I was born in Santa Fe, New Mexico. I think Ted's is Oh.
Well, I only go to that one specific Ted's because it's like.
Okay, all right.
Any other
Oh.
ones?
You can make an argument. This is not, I mean, but where else do you think? Who else has?
Maybe in the Paseo district, I don't know.
I think they would be attracted to a lot of things, like Paseo Grill, I think is.
They have a restaurant called the Mayan there
Um,
now.
yeah,
Maybe the melting pot.
What
I
about
think, that, because that's fondue, it's different.
Make it-
Not everybody likes smelly cheese, right? I think that they would be attracted, I think innovators would be attracted to things like cultivar. How many of you have been, the first one of these that I went to was in Plano, my brother lives in Plano. There's a place called Legacy Hall, and it's got like 5 different bars and about 20 different restaurants in there. And we've now got smaller versions of that in Oklahoma City. One is called The Parlor. Have any of you been to The Parlor? And the other one is called The Collective. It's on 10th. And it's like, again, it's locally sourced food. It's a twist on stuff that's not necessarily, so like the taco place in The Collective is fried tacos. And they are good. I mean, of course, if you deep fat fry anything, it's like crack, right? It's really good. I think innovators would be attracted to something like that. It's, everybody can get what they want. They've got lots of, interesting cocktails.
Like state fair would be considered somewhere,
Where?
like the state fair, like how they always have like,
Yeah.
that'd be a place.
I actually love the state fair. It's one of the things, because I like to walk around and see what people would rather have than their own money. But, the arts festival, like all the food booths at the arts festival would be attracted to innovators because they're not typical sort of, street vendor food. But like they have on Hudson, there's all these things that it's not just on Hudson anymore. It started out as H and 8th, where they would have food trucks that would come to this one place once a month and now they've got a permanent sort of thing there. There are all these food trucks that come. In terms of like cocktails, what do you think innovators would be interested in? Which, by the way, this is one where I diverge. I think that cocktails should have like 2 ingredients, nothing else, like bourbon and branch, right? Like 2 ingredients, and like all of this pink pomegranate spritzy martini. What? Craziness. Like, that's just idiocy. Right? But I think innovators would be attracted to that kind of thing. So what else do you think would be a cocktail that they would like?
Anything at Fuzzies.
Anything in fuzzies?
Fuzzies, yeah. Fuzzies, good.
Okay. How many of you have been to Scratch?
Mm-mm.
It's a bar. So
think
they have
I-
all of these.
I think I just went there.
Huh?
I think I just went
Yeah,
there.
They have all of these incredibly stupid. One of my friends just loves to go there, and I just cringe every single time he orders a drink because it's like that just is disgusting. Again, like cocktails, you have 2 bourbon and branch, right? That's a cocktail. Cuba Libre. What is a Cuba Libre?
I don't know.
Rum and Coke, right? That's a Cuba Libre. 2 ingredients. Rum and Coke, that's a cocktail. Pink spritzy martini, no, that's an abomination. Okay. Receptive to new ideas. So these are the ones that are, when the iPhone came out, I had friends who they were the first in line. They pre-ordered the iPhone and I was like, that'll drop like a rock in 3 months. Was it worth it? And it did. The first iPhone, it dropped considerably in price. And they're like, it was absolutely worth it. To have it for those 3 and to be able to show it off. They were the first ones to run out and buy an Apple Watch when the Apple, when the Apple Watch was released. So thinkers. Thinkers are highly normative. What does normative mean? It means that they focus on values, the ought, should. They can have analysis paralysis. So in terms of social styles, the innovator, what do you think is the primary social style that innovators are going to be?
Driver.
I think you'll find a lot of drivers in the innovative group. In social styles, in terms of thinkers, where are you going to find, what social style do you think you're going to find there? A lot of analyticals, yeah. I mean, it just, those are the two that are very clearly, I think, most closely aligned. So they have analysis paralysis. They like a historical perspective. Thinkers tend to be older. You have to be a little bit older. One of the things that happens in terms of academics, so if you get a PhD in mathematics, you will make your mark, if you're going to make your mark as an academic, very early on. Once you're in your 30s, you're past your prime for physicists or mathematicians. They have to think enormously quickly, and your mind just doesn't, and this has happened to me. When I was a teenager, my mind would just race. And one time my cousin woke me up because I was doing math, and she's like, what are you doing? You're like doing, and I'm like, I'm calculating the average in my sleep. And my mind just raced. And that's what you have to have if you're going to make your mark. Einstein, for example, after a lot of people hypothesized, he had his first wife and he did a lot of really innovative work. And then he married a second wife, and they hypothesized that maybe the first wife, who was also a physicist, I believe, was the one who was the real brains behind it. I don't think that's true. He was old. And they just don't think, they're not cutting edge at that point. Historians, on the other hand, don't become great until they hit about 50. The historians that become great, if you think about the great historians alive today, Doris Kearns Goodwin, right? H.W. Brands. Brands is 70. You have to, your brain thinks differently. I think differently now than I did when I was young. I was very, very sharp. But now, it's not that I am not sharp. I don't think as quickly as but I do remember things. I can remember things that happened a long time ago, and I have this historical perspective now that I didn't when I was younger. And so thinkers oftentimes tend to be older because you have to have some age in order to really appreciate or understand history. You have to have that, you have to have experienced a lot of things. So thinkers, because they have access to resources, will use technology in functional ways. So for example, lots of grandparents now, if you have access to it, they love the iPhone. And what do they love about the iPhone? What do they learn to do on the
The
iPhone?
video chat.
They learn how to use the FaceTime app, because it used to be that historically families lived in the same, but that's not true. My mother's grandkids now, for a long time when they were born in New York. They now live in Dallas, but that's still 250 miles away. But she can see, my brother will call on FaceTime as they're playing games, or when my niece is, she's in this advanced gymnastics thing, he'll call and he'll flip the camera around on FaceTime, and my mother can watch her grandchild now, compete in gymnastics. So that's what they like about it. She doesn't like the technology for its own sake, like my friends who ran out and bought the iPhone. It's what can it do for me? Well, it allows me to have this connection. My mother noticed one time in New York, my brother called and FaceTimed her, and he's like, "The kids want to talk to you." And all of a sudden, she realized that she was virtual babysitting. They had friends over for a dinner party, and they wanted to get rid of the kids, and so they called Grandma Becky, And she really, and the kids are running around the house and they're like, let's put Grandma Becky in the flower pot, and she realized that she was being used. She was highly annoyed by that my brother manipulated her into that,
Wow.
that's the kind of things you can do now, and that's the way they use technology. They like to buy proven products. There was a book that came out years ago called The Millionaire Next Door, and at that time, the number one car in America, the number one selling car, and the most popular car in America, and one that was driven by the most millionaires was the Ford Taurus. They didn't buy cat. Why did they like it? It was highly reliable. It was the most boring car on the planet, but it was reliable. It was proven. It was a solid product. It was a good product. And of course, Ford got rid of it. I don't know why. Although the Ford F-150 is the number one selling truck in America. I'm out of time, so we will stop there. Stopped. No, just it has to be the length. Yeah, the length, and you have to. It should be in a narrative form, and it should be the length requirement. Which I don't think is ridiculous. It's more about what you get out of it. Yeah, but it's qualified.
Yeah, that's all one.